one voice, one unforgettable presence sweeping through a classroom, robes billowing, words precise and cutting. For many of us, that presence is Alan Rickman's, measured, elegant, already knowing the end of the story because, long before the final book was written, he had been entrusted with Snape's deepest secret. But the Snape on the page is not always the Snape on the screen. To understand why HBO's version could feel completely different, we have to understand the distance between those two shadows. In the books, Snape is harsher, pettier, more openly cruel to students like Neville and Hermione, more visibly greasy and sallow, less like a tragic Gothic guardian, and more like a deeply damaged man whose bitterness seeps into every lesson he teaches. Imagine a world where the cameras do not have to rush, where there is time to linger in a silent staff room, to watch Snape's expression shift when he hears the name Lily, to follow him through long, lonely corridors as the war outside the castle presses in. A long-form HBO adaptation can slow the story down, stretch the moments between the lines, and reveal a Snape who is colder on the surface, messier in his choices, and perhaps more human in the quiet spaces the films never had room to show. This video will be a slow journey through memory, adaptation, and character. Sometimes we will move through the familiar scenes you remember from late-night rewatches. Sometimes we will slip into the book's forgotten corners. But always we will return to that central question. Who is Snape, really, when we peel back the layers of performance and prophecy? If you're listening while you fall asleep, you don't need to hold on to every detail. You can let the soft musical interludes wash over you. Let your attention drift when it wants to. And in the morning, if you'd like, you can tell us in the comments how many nights you've fallen asleep to this series, and which Snape feels closest to you. The books, the films, or the one you imagine HBO might create. To understand why HBO's Snape could diverge so strongly, we'll first need to float back through the broader magical world that shaped him. The ancient school, the gathering darkness, the stakes that turned a bitter boy into a double agent. We'll widen the lens to take in that history, then narrow it again, returning to the man at its center. Now, back to the video. So, for a moment, we let ourselves drift. Imagine a world that exists just a breath away from the room you're in now, separated not by distance, but by a thin veil of unspoken possibility. Stone corridors stretch into darkness, their flagstones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Above them, floating candles hover in slow, patient constellations, shedding pools of warm light that never quite reach the vaulted ceiling. Portraits doze in heavy frames. Some mutter in their sleep, some watch with half-lidded eyes, and some, in the very oldest wings, remember wars no one speaks of aloud. This is a wizarding world that feels almost dreamlike, the sort of place you wake from at 3 in the morning and wonder, for a heartbeat, whether it was ever real at all. And then we return to where you are. A quiet room, the soft glow of a screen, the gentle rise and fall of your breathing. We often think of the magical world as something far away, a separate story with its own rules and dangers, but in truth, it is a heightened echo of our own. The same fears, only sharpened, the same loyalties, only tested, the same grudges, stretched across a lifetime instead of a single argument. As we peel back the layers of this history, Hogwarts itself comes into focus. Not just a school, but an ancient castle where history is alive in the stones. Old wars leave stains on the walls that no spell can quite remove. A trophy in a glass case still gleams with the memory of a boy who never came home. A suit of armor rattles at night, not from mischief, but from a curse laid on it in a forgotten duel. In those corridors, a single professor can carry decades of secrets in his gaze. Sometimes a guardian, sometimes a threat, always watched and never fully understood. Tonight, we're diving into that space between candlelight and shadow, because it is there, in the half-lit corners of the potions classroom and the silent edges of the Great Hall, that Severus Snape truly lives. We have to understand that the story of the boy who lived is only one bright thread in a much wider tapestry. Long before an owl found its way to Privet Drive, promises were made, betrayals were sealed, and a lonely young wizard traced his own path through darkness. Harry's journey moves across the surface, but beneath it, Snape is a dark, persistent current, tugging at events, redirecting destinies, reshaping what prophecy will mean. Soft orchestral strings swell in the background, then fade, inviting you to let the details wash over you without effort. You do not need to hold every date, every name, every spell. We will return to this man in black again and again, from new angles, each pass revealing another facet of his world. For now, you can simply rest in the atmosphere, the hush of the library at midnight, the distant toll of a bell, the echo of footsteps that might be a teacher, or a ghost, or a spy. Who, in this world of secrets, walks beside you in the dark? In a moment, we'll follow that question down into Snape's past and into the choices that will make HBO's version of him feel so different from the one we remember. So, as we follow that question down into Snape's past, we also have to lift our eyes to the wider horizon of the wizarding world that surrounds him. This is not just the story of one bitter man in a classroom. It is the story of a society forever poised between open war and careful secrecy, between stepping into the light and vanishing once more into the shadows of our myths. Imagine a world that has survived for centuries by staying half a step out of sight. Wizards walk the same streets you do, ride the same trains, pass you in the fog, and yet a single broken charm, a single public duel, could tear the veil away. To understand why a man like Snape matters so much, we have to understand that every choice he makes, every allegiance he claims, presses on that fragile balance between revelation and disappearance. At the heart of this balance stands the International Statute of Secrecy. On parchment, it is just a law. In practice, it is the invisible border that decides where witches build their homes, how children are told the truth, and why a gloomy potions master can exist in plain sight of hundreds of young eyes and still remain fundamentally unknown. Long before Harry walks into that dungeon classroom, this statute has already written the stage directions for Snape's performance. Hogwarts itself is an institution shaped by those rules. It is a school, a sanctuary, a fortress, and a mask. Now, back to the video, and we notice how institutions give people roles to wear: teacher, Death Eater, spy, protector. Sometimes those roles are clear, embroidered neatly on a robe. Sometimes they slip and slide, one over another, until even the person wearing them no longer remembers which is skin and which is costume. Snape's life is the art of moving between these identities. He kneels to Voldemort and reports to Dumbledore. He terrorizes Neville in class and protects Harry from Quirrell's jinx. He stands at the staff table as a colleague, yet carries secrets that could shatter the Ministry. As we peel back the layers, we find that his story is not an exception to this world's architecture. It is one of its purest expressions. Because in this history, darkness does not only arrive in the form of Dark Lords and open battles. It seeps through paperwork, through unchecked traditions, through the quiet cruelty that is tolerated in corridors and classrooms. A bored examiner, a complacent governor, a teacher who mocks instead of mentors. All of them help build the conditions in which real monsters thrive. Snape's choices, his pettiness, and his courage sit inside that larger moral machinery. And so a softer question begins to form. If the boy in the cupboard became the world's hope, what does it mean that one of his most important guardians was a man who both protected and tormented him? What happens if HBO lets us see that man more clearly and less kindly than the films ever dared? In the next part of our story, we'll step closer to that answer and to the boy who first met Severus Snape across a simmering cauldron. Across that simmering cauldron, something else hangs in the air with the steam. Not just potion fumes, but the older, heavier themes that have always haunted this wizarding world. Tonight, we're diving into those threads of obsession and fear that coil around Severus Snape, and that an HBO series could finally let us see in their full, unsettling detail. We often think of Harry's story as one of friendship and courage, but running beneath it are darker currents. The obsession with bloodlines, the terror of mortality, the quiet cruelty of prejudice, and the slow, seductive pull of power over others. These are not abstract ideas. They are the invisible rules that shape who is valued, who is feared, and who is discarded in this ancient world of magic. To understand why Snape might look so different on a new screen, we have to understand how deeply he is tangled in each of these themes. In a movement obsessed with pure blood, he is a half-blood, following a Dark Lord who calls himself the heir of Slytherin. The boy from Spinner's End, mocked as Snivelus and trapped between a Muggle father and a witch mother, chooses a cause that promises to erase the shame of his origins. Imagine a world where the very thing you are made of is treated as a stain, and the only way to feel powerful is to join those who sneer at people just like you. Then there is the fear of death. Voldemort pushes that fear to its logical extreme, tearing his soul apart to flee mortality. Dumbledore, in his own way, seeks to master death through knowledge and sacrifice. Snape stands between them, clinging to Lily as a fragile answer to loneliness and oblivion. His do Patronus, mirroring hers, is not just a symbol of love, it is a spell against the darkness, a desperate attempt to make one life matter beyond the grave. Yet Snape is not only a victim of prejudice, he wields it. His contempt for Muggle-borns, his cutting remarks to Hermione, his cruel treatment of Neville, all reveal a man who has absorbed the wizarding world's hierarchies and turned them into weapons. In the classroom, his hunger for recognition and control curdles into humiliation and fear. He does not simply teach, he dominates. Orbiting above all this are two of the most dangerous wizards of their age. Tom Riddle, who becomes Voldemort, and Albus Dumbledore, who opposes him, form twin gravity wells, and Snape spends his life spiraling between their pull. He is marked by Voldemort's dark mark, yet bound to Dumbledore by a promise and a prophecy. Does he ever truly escape either man's shadow, or does he only change which master he fears most? As we peel back the layers of his history, quiet questions begin to glow. What artifacts and memories shaped his path from schoolboy to Death Eater? The borrowed books, the whispered spells, the moment he first rolled up his sleeve to receive that mark. What truly turned him from Voldemort's follower into Dumbledore's double agent? Remorse for Lily, horror at prophecy, or a deeper, more selfish need to rewrite his own story? A long-form HBO series could linger where the films hurried. It could show the first flash of the do Patronus in a darkened room, the way Snape's hand trembles before he casts it. It could reorder his memories, letting us walk through them not as a final revelation, but as a slow, unsettling journey. Would we still call him the bravest man if we saw every moment of pettiness, of cowardice, of calculated cruelty that led there, held in the light for just a few seconds longer? Now, back to the video. We move from themes to turning points, and to the night when a boy on a broom and a man in black first became enemies in truth. Because before we can judge HBO's Snape, we have to watch him choose which darkness to serve and which promise to break. To understand why this one night on a broom matters so much, we have to understand the river of time that carried Severus Snape there. He did not step into Harry's story from nowhere. He arrived bearing centuries of history on his shoulders and a childhood already shaped by an ancient quarrel between worlds. Tonight, we're diving into that river by floating backwards, not only to Spinner's End and the thin, sharp boy pressed between two warring parents, but further still into the older currents of wizarding history that shaped the world he was born into. Long before Severus ever lifted a wand, wizards and muggles had been locked in cycles of fear and violence, and the echoes of those dark ages whispered into every choice he made. Imagine a world before the Ministry, before the Statute of Secrecy, when a burst of accidental magic could mean a burning stake or a river's depth. As we peel back the layers of this history, we pass through those early centuries of open conflict, into the founding of Hogwarts as a hidden refuge, and the slow rise of institutions that tried to tame chaos with law. Wizards' councils, the Ministry, Azkaban, the unforgivable curses. Each new structure promised safety, and each one carried its own shadows. We move then through the global storms, Grindelwald's War, when the greater good nearly shattered the veil between worlds, and the first rise of Voldemort, who turned blood purity from a prejudice into a prophecy of conquest. These are not just background dates on a timeline. They are the weather of Snape's childhood, the climate of suspicion and ideology in which a lonely boy from a mixed household learned what it meant to be Slytherin. From there, our thread tightens. We follow it into the Marauders era, into classrooms where a young Severus and a young Lily sit side by side, and corridors where James and Sirius turn that thread into a noose. Sometimes it glimmers with possibility, sometimes it knots with humiliation, but always it pulls us forward, into his Death Eater years, into the first Wizarding War, into the moment he falls at Dumbledore's feet and begs for Lily's life. And then, the Second War. The quiet, fateful years of Harry's schooling, where that same thread frays and tangles around lessons and detentions, around occlumency and insults, around every small act of cruelty the films softened, and every reluctant act of protection they highlighted. This is where book Snape and film Snape begin to drift apart, and where an HBO series can choose which version to follow. Our destination never changes. A cold, echoing room in the Shrieking Shack. A man bleeding out on a dusty floor. A boy realizing that nothing he thought he knew about this professor was simple. But along the way, we will pause in key classrooms, corridors, and memories, comparing the page to the screen, and imagining how new pacing, framing, and moral weight might make HBO's Snape feel not familiar at all, but startlingly anew. And as we trace that single, glimmering thread of magic through history, we will keep asking, at which moment could it have twisted another way? To understand why a single bitter man in a dungeon classroom can matter so much, we have to understand the world that was built long before he was born. Long before Snape, long before Voldemort, there were four figures standing in the midst of an older, harsher Britain, arguing about what it meant to protect children with magic. Imagine a world where the word Hogwarts has never been spoken, where young witches and wizards grow up scattered, frightened, or dangerously unchecked. In that world, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin do something astonishing. They do not just create a school. They create a shelter, a hidden citadel where magic can be studied and shaped instead of feared and hunted. We often think of the Four Houses as a personality quiz with colors and mascots. But in the beginning, they are philosophies written into stone. Gryffindor dreams of courage as a public good, Hufflepuff of fairness shared equally, Ravenclaw of knowledge pursued for its own quiet sake, and Slytherin, standing slightly apart, whispers of legacy, of blood, of power guarded from those he believes will never understand it. As we peel back the layers of this history, Slytherin's choice becomes a fault line. His emphasis on blood purity and ambition plants seeds that will sleep for centuries, hard and cold beneath the castle floors. He leaves behind more than a row with his friends. He leaves the Chamber of Secrets, a hidden weapon coiled in darkness, and an idea even more dangerous, that some children, by birth alone, deserve more safety, more knowledge, more future than others. Outside the walls, the wider world is no kinder. Early wizard-muggle relations are a tangle of fear and dependence. Sometimes wizards serve as advisors in shadowed courts, nudging kings away from disaster. Sometimes they are village healers, the secret midwife, the unexplained cure. And sometimes they are the monster in the story, dragged to the pyre or the riverbank when crops fail or storms refuse to break. Sometimes revered, sometimes hunted, but always with the looming threat of discovery. Over centuries, this pressure hardens into the statute of secrecy, into a culture that survives by vanishing. It breeds habits of concealment, of suspicion, and for some, a quiet conviction that if you must hide from the non-magical world, you must also be above it. This is the root of later divides, the slow-growing tension between those who see magic as a gift to be shared and those who see it as a weapon or a birthright. That tension will echo in Grindelwald's rhetoric, in Voldemort's crusade, and finally in the choices of a lonely half-blood boy who hears Slytherin's old promise and wonders where he belongs. Tonight, we're diving into Snape's story through this older lens because HBO, with hours instead of minutes, can let these echoes ring. It can frame Slytherin House not just as a nest of villains, but as an inheritance of fear and pride. It can linger on a curriculum that prizes certain talents, on teachers whose subtle biases push a child toward one prophecy and away from another. And as we move forward into Snape's childhood, we will see how an ancient argument about who deserves magic becomes painfully personal on a small, shabby street in a Muggle town. Now, back to the video, and to the boy who will carry all of this history in his very name. And while that boy grows up under a leaking roof and a broken lamppost, the wider wizarding world is already humming with forces that will shape his choices long before he ever lifts a wand. Imagine a world that is breathtaking at first glance and quietly lethal underneath. A world where a miscast spell can turn a teacup into a turtle forever, where a single word uttered in panic can mark a child, or erase a memory, or shatter a family's future. In this world, laws are written to cradle that danger, laws that are as ancient as the stars, and yet as fragile as the glass orbs that sleep in the Department of Mysteries. To understand why Snape can ever exist as a double agent, we have to understand the machinery that grows up around such magic. Long before the Ministry polished its brass nameplates, there was the Wizards' Council, a looser gathering of robed figures trying, often failing, to keep peace with Muggles and with each other. Over centuries, fear hardens into parchment. Persecution becomes policy. By the time Ulick Gamp takes office as the first Minister for Magic, the Statute of Secrecy is law, and an entire bureaucracy blooms in the shadows, dedicated to control. We often think of the ministry as comic background noise in the films, a place of whirling paper airplanes and eccentric workers. But in the deeper history, each new office is born from some remembered terror. Misuse of Muggle artifacts after one too many cursed teapots, Auror recruitment drives after Grindelwald, stricter registries every time a dark wizard rises and falls. Sometimes these departments protect, sometimes they simply watch, but always they are afraid. Nowhere is that fear more visible than in Azkaban. Once, it is only a cursed fortress on a storm-beaten rock, a place even the Ministry avoids. Then someone discovers that the horrors within can be repurposed. Dementors, those drifting shadows that drink warmth and hope, are given uniforms in everything but name, turned into official guardians of justice. When the very air of your prison feeds on joy, what does justice even mean? When a government chooses that method, what happens to the souls it claims to defend? This is the world Severus Snape walks through. He moves from Hogwarts' staff room to the Order of the Phoenix's hidden kitchens, from Dumbledore's office to Voldemort's candlelit councils, and eventually along the Ministry's dim corridors as a supposed ally of the regime. Every institution he touches is compromised. The Death Eaters by cruelty, the Ministry by cowardice, the Order by secrecy, and desperate half-truths. Is Snape uniquely twisted, or is he also a mirror of the systems that use him? Tonight, we're diving into a version of this story where HBO lets us feel those systems pressing in. We can almost hear the scratch of quills in an oppressive staff meeting, see Snape's face half lost in greenish ministry light, watch order strategy sessions where no one fully trusts him, yet everyone needs him. As we peel back the layers of this history, Snape stops being only a solitary, brooding figure in a classroom doorway and becomes a man pinned between gears that were turning centuries before he was born. In the next part of this story, we will step away from the marble corridors and into the narrow rooms of his childhood to see how a boy from Spinner's End learns to navigate a world that already runs on fear. And yet, even before we step into that narrow house on Spinner's End, there are older shadows waiting for him. Long before Snape is born, the wizarding world is already haunted by a story of three brothers who met death on a lonely road. We often think of the Peveril tale as a children's legend, a bedtime story wrapped around the Deathly Hallows. But to understand why Snape's choices feel so heavy, we have to understand what those hallows represent. Three answers to the terror of dying. The Elder Wand promises domination over death through power. The Resurrection Stone promises evasion, a way to call the lost back from the darkness. The Invisibility Cloak whispers of quiet acceptance, of walking beside mortality without being consumed by it. Those three paths echo through the history around him. Grindelwald covets the Elder Wand, dreaming of ruling the wizarding world so thoroughly that death itself must wait at his command. Dumbledore, drawn to the Resurrection Stone, is tempted by the thought of seeing his family again, of undoing a past that still bleeds. And in the end, Harry walks the Cloak's road, stepping towards sacrifice, not as a weapon, but as a willing, trembling acceptance. Tonight, we're diving into the uncomfortable truth that Snape never quite finds the Cloak's peace. As we peel back the layers of this history, we see that he is born into a world already shaped by Dumbledore and Grindelwald's dream of the greater good, that grand phrase that makes cruelty sound noble. Their youthful vision of remaking the world, of deciding who should rule and who should kneel, is the same kind of rhetoric that later wraps itself around the Death Eaters. Different banners, the same hunger for control. Imagine a world where the legendary duel of 1945 is not just a date in a textbook, but a wound in living memory. Every ambitious witch or wizard grows up in its aftermath, walking through corridors where portraits still whisper about fallen idols and broken promises. Snape enters Hogwarts in that long twilight, with Dumbledore now a symbol of restraint and Grindelwald a cautionary tale locked far away, and he is quietly measuring himself against ghosts he never met. In that atmosphere, his personal fear of loss sharpens. Lily becomes, for him, not only a person, but a promise that he might matter to someone in a world ruled by legends. When he turns to Voldemort, it is under banners of destiny and purity. When he turns back to Dumbledore, it is under banners of protection and prophecy. He serves two masters, not because he has mastered death, but because he is trying to delay it for one boy who carries Lily's eyes. Now, back to the video, and to what an HBO series can do with this. With time to move between centuries and classrooms, between the Peveril's Road and the streets of Spinner's End, the show could weave Hallows, bloodlines, and old duels around Snape's every choice, framing him not as a side character, but as a man standing where all these currents meet. The question is, when we finally see that crossroads on screen, which brother's path will he seem closest to? To understand why that crossroads matters, we have to understand where Severus begins. Not in a candlelit dungeon or a swirling classroom, but in a narrow street pressed close to a sluggish, polluted river, where the air itself seems to sag with exhaustion. Spinner's End is small, yet in the books it feels endless, a repeating row of brick houses with peeling doors and curtained windows, the smell of damp seeping through stone, coal smoke hanging low over the water. Imagine a world where your first lessons in power are not charms and potions, but raised voices through thin walls, slammed doors, and the quiet knowledge that words can wound more cleanly than any spell. Inside one of those houses, a Muggle man and a witch share a life that is more truce than home. Tobias Snape, non-magical, resentful, often volatile. Eileen Prince, witch-born, worn down, her own magic reduced to small, frustrated gestures. The books never linger long here, but the shadows are unmistakable. A boy who sees his mother diminished, his father dismissive, begins to equate Muggle with weakness and humiliation. Long before he hears the name Slytherin, Severus learns that knowledge is a shield, and that one day he will have power that cannot be ignored. And then, one bright thread in all that darkness, Lily Evans. In the books, he watches her from the bushes at the edge of a playground, thin and sharp-eyed, his clothes ill-fitting, his hair already greasy. She makes a flower open and close in her hand without understanding how. He steps out, awkward and intense, to explain that it is magic, that there is a hidden wizarding world, that she is not a freak, but extraordinary. We often think of Snape as perpetually cold, but this is one of the few moments of uncomplicated warmth in his early history, a boy offering secrets instead of insults. Tonight, we're diving into the part the film's only gesture toward, the long summers where Lily drifts between wonder and unease at his bitterness. The first tiny fractures when he mocks her sister, or speaks with too much relish about pure-blood families. As we peel back the layers of this friendship, we can feel how fragile it already is. Then comes the Hogwarts Express and the sorting hat. On the page, he is sallow, hook-nosed, awkward, his hair hanging in curtains, nothing of the elegant, composed figure Alan Rickman would later give us. He sits alone until Lily finds him. They share a compartment, but not a future. Under the hat, his choice is barely a choice at all. Slytherin offers belonging, power, a name that sounds nothing like Spinner's End. Can you imagine an HBO episode that moves slowly through this single year, letting us sit with the long train ride, the sorting, the first sneers from James and Sirius, the first time Lily looks at him and hesitates? Sometimes a life changes in a duel. Sometimes it changes in a sentence. But always, it begins in rooms and streets that television has barely shown us. Now, back to the video, as we follow him into those echoing stone corridors and watch what he does with the home he thought he wanted. We pass through those corridors with him now, not as distant observers, but as if we are sitting on the grass by the black lake, the sun too bright, the laughter too loud. Tonight, we're diving into the shadow that falls over these school years, the long afternoon where a boy is told again and again what he is worth. We often think of Snape through the soft haze of film memory, a few brief flashes of teenage cruelty, and then we are rushed back to the safer present. But on the page, Snape's worst memory is not a passing moment. It is a slow, almost unbearable sequence. James and Sirius pinning him in front of a watching crowd, stripping him down to his underwear, hexes and jinxes turning his body into a spectacle, while students jeer and gossip as though this is simply another form of entertainment. To understand why this matters, we have to understand how different this is from what the films showed us. On screen, the humiliation is shorter, blurred, almost stylized, the camera cutting away before the full weight of it settles. In the book, there is no such mercy. The scene lingers, the details accumulate, and Lily's horrified face is framed not as a rescue, but as a reminder that even the kindest person in his world cannot stop the tide of cruelty washing over him. Imagine a world where HBO allows that scene to unfold at its original, uncomfortable length. The camera might stay with Snape as the grass digs into his back, as his wand is wrenched away, as his clothes vanish and the laughter swells. It might rest on Lily's eyes, on the way she hesitates, torn between the boy she once shared secrets with and the social gravity of James Potter, golden and untouchable in the wizarding hierarchy of the time. And yet, the darkness that grows in Snape is not only something done to him. The books are clear. His sharp tongue cuts back, his fascination with the dark arts deepens, and before long he is surrounded by other students who speak in blood purity whispers. The bullying and his bitterness form a loop, each feeding the other, until he begins to become the very threat his tormentors claim he already is. Does repeated humiliation excuse the hexes he later perfects, or does it simply explain them? HBO has the time to show the quiet evenings after these explosions, when Lily and Severus sit under a tree or in a corner of the common room and argue in low voices. As we peel back the layers, we see her patience thinning as he jokes about curses, as he defends new friends with skull-shaped dreams, as the word mudblood finally tears through the air between them and cannot be taken back. In a series, that single word does not have to be a sudden outburst. It can be the culmination of many smaller choices, many smaller surrenders to ancient prejudices. We watch Lily step away not in one dramatic turn, but in a dozen small silences, a dozen unanswered letters, a dozen evenings where she chooses another seat at the table. If we are allowed to live inside those years, to walk from detention to dormitory with him, to feel the anger cooling into something harder and more deliberate, does he become more understandable to you? Or does the long view make his decision to hurt others and to wound Lily herself feel even more tragic and less excusable? The answer to that question may be where HBO's Snape finally diverges from the one we remember, and where our sympathy is tested in ways the films never quite dared. To understand why that sympathy might fracture, we have to understand what the films almost never showed you. The years when Severus Snape was not a reluctant protector, but a willing recruit. We often think of him as the bitter teacher and secret guardian, yet before any of that, he was a young man stepping, eyes open, into Voldemort's rising darkness. Long before the first book begins, the clues are scattered through the pages, almost shy of our attention. We hear of a boy who arrives at Hogwarts already fluent in curses, who invents new hexes in the margins of his schoolbooks, who is drawn to the forbidden shelves where magic turns from defensive to predatory. We see him gravitating towards students who will later bear the dark mark. Avery, Mulciber, the shadows at the edges of Slughorn's gatherings, standing just outside the light, listening, learning, hungry to be noticed. Imagine a world in which that hunger is finally rewarded. The books hint at Death Eater meetings in the years after school, at raids and whispered oaths, at Snape's presence among cloaked figures who terrorize Muggleborns and enforce blood purity with wands raised and faces masked. The films compress this entire history into a glimpse of his dark mark and a handful of lines. They let us skip over his early fanaticism, his complicity in the First War, as though the man who calls Lily a slur simply appeared one day in a staff room, already half redeemed. But the page suggests something more complicated and more unsettling. Snape does not join Voldemort only because he believes in the creed of Slytherin and Salazar's ancient prejudice. He joins because, after a childhood of neglect and humiliation, here is a world that seems to value his particular gifts, his sharp mind, his talent for dangerous magic, even his anger. Sometimes he is driven by ideology, sometimes by wounded pride, sometimes by the intoxicating relief of belonging to a secret circle that says, "At last, you matter." But always, there is that gnawing desire to be chosen. Tonight, we're diving into the moment that desire turns catastrophic. At the Hogshead, in a dingy upstairs room, Snape crouches outside a door, eavesdropping on a conversation between Dumbledore and Sybil Trelawney. He hears only part of the prophecy. He carries it straight to Voldemort, offering it as proof of his worth. Only later does he understand that in doing so, he has delivered Lily Potter's death sentence with his own hands. As we peel back the layers of this history, we can almost see how an HBO series might linger where the films hurried. Full sequences could unfold inside Death Eater councils, in torchlit manors where Voldemort praises his followers and Snape stands near the front, and in brutal raids where his spells are precise, efficient, terrifyingly controlled. Imagine a spy arc that begins not with nobility, but with panic. Snape begging Dumbledore to save Lily, then being sent back into the very world he helped empower, every meeting a reminder of what he has done. Would watching that descent and reversal, step by step, make his eventual regret feel more earned, or expose just how far into the darkness he chose to walk before he ever turned back? Now, back to the video, because the next chapter of his double life raises an even sharper question about what redemption can truly mean. To understand why HBO's Snape might feel so different, we have to understand the moment his old life truly ends. Not in a duel, not in a classroom, but on a cold floor before Albus Dumbledore, where pride and ideology collapse into one raw, desperate plea. Long before he is the stern potions master we meet at Hogwarts, Severus is a Death Eater who has carried a fragment of prophecy to Voldemort, never imagining how precisely it will cut. When he realizes that the Dark Lord has marked Lily Potter for death, he goes to the only wizard powerful enough to stand in the way. We see him in the book's memories, falling at Dumbledore's feet, begging him to hide her, to save her, offering anything in return. He does not ask for James. He does not ask for the child. He asks for Lily, and Lily alone. Then the world ends anyway. Lily dies. Voldemort falls. And in another echoing corridor, Snape returns to Dumbledore, this time not as a fanatic, but as a man hollowed out by the consequences of his own choices. He begs again, now for the boy he once dismissed, for the child who is the last living trace of the woman he loved and betrayed. Save her son. Keep him alive. Let my life, from this point on, be payment. We often think of that vow as pure, tragic love. But as we peel back the layers, the emotion is far more tangled. There is love, yes, fierce and unchanging across years of bitterness. There is obsession, the wish to preserve Lily in any form, even in a boy who has his father's face. And there is guilt, heavy enough to bend his spine, because Severus knows that without his actions, there would have been no prophecy for Voldemort to follow. Dumbledore reads all of this in him. Then he turns it, very gently, toward the needs of the Order. Tonight, we're diving into that bargain. Snape will go back, Dumbledore decides. Back into Voldemort's ranks when the Dark Lord rises again, back into the gatherings marked by masks and whispers, back into a world of casual cruelty that once thrilled him. He will carry messages in both directions, always watched, never fully trusted, living in a constant state of fear and divided loyalty. Sometimes as spy, sometimes as teacher, but always as a man walking on a blade. The films condense this entire double life into a handful of charged moments, a murmured conversation on a dark hillside, a Patronus in a forest, a final revelation in a pensive. The books, though, suggest years of quiet, dangerous work. Long stretches of teaching by day and reporting by night, of sitting at the staff table while hiding secrets from colleagues, of standing in the Death Eater's circle while hiding secrets from killers. Over time, that erosion matters. It shapes a man who trusts almost no one, not even the headmaster he serves. Imagine a world where HBO does not rush past those years, but lingers in them. We could return again and again to Dumbledore's office, to whispered meetings over maps and memories, to coded messages passed through Order members who do not know their source. We could watch the slow unraveling of Snape's sense of self as he becomes a tool for a cause he only half believes in, bound more to a promise over a grave than to any grand vision of the wizarding world. Would that make him feel more heroic or more tragic? And if this is the debt that defines him, what happens when the time finally comes for Dumbledore to collect it? Now, back to the video. Because the next turn in this story will ask how far a man can go in cruelty while still claiming to act in love. Alan Rickman steps into that debt like a shadow sliding across stone. He does not explain it. He does not plead his case. He simply appears, a tall, elegant silhouette in black, gliding through the corridors of Hogwarts with a measured drawl and a gaze that seems to see through you rather than at you. We often think of Snape as that figure first, the controlled stillness, the way every word lands with the weight of a spell. In the books, we are told of a greasy curtain of hair, a sallow face, a hooked nose, and a perpetual sneer, an unpleasant man who delights in taking points and humiliating children. But on screen, Rickman turns those same ingredients into something closer to a Gothic icon, a presence who carries the ancient darkness of the wizarding world in the fall of his robes. To understand why that happened, we have to understand the secret he was carrying. Long before most of the scripts were written, J.K. Rowling told Rickman who Snape truly was and what he would ultimately do. That knowledge becomes a quiet current beneath the performance, a slight softening in the eyes when Lily's name is mentioned, a pause before he insults Harry, a flicker of something almost like grief when he stares at the boy's face and sees another world that might have been. On the page, Snape's cruelty is often raw and petty. He mocks Neville until the boy shakes. He calls Hermione an insufferable know-it-all in front of her classmates. He docks points from Gryffindor for the smallest imagined slight. The language of the books does not rush to save him. It allows him to be small and spiteful, as well as brave. The films, though, sand down those edges, trimming scenes of classroom humiliation and lingering instead on his silence, his poise, his mystery. Cinematically, the story conspires with him. Low, sympathetic lighting carves his face out of the surrounding darkness. Close-ups hold on his expression as the music swells, inviting us to search for secrets, to assume there must be a wounded heart beneath the harsh words. Sometimes he is framed at the edge of the light, sometimes at the center of the storm, but always as a man we are meant to watch closely, not merely fear. Tonight, we're diving into what that means for a new adaptation. If HBO chooses an actor who is less effortlessly charismatic and leans closer to the text's description of a greasy, sallow, deeply unpleasant man, will we still feel that same tragic pull? Imagine a world where Snape's presence is not graceful but unnerving, where the camera does not rescue him with soft music and romantic shadows. Would a more visibly frightening, more openly abusive Snape feel truer to the history of this character, or would audiences reject him after centuries under Rickman's spell? As we peel back the layers of this performance, we begin to see the challenge that awaits whoever wears the black robes next. And nowhere is that challenge clearer than in a quiet, echoing dungeon classroom on Harry's very first day of potions. We often think of that scene through the soft haze of the film. Alan Rickman gliding between desks, voice low and velvety, turning the room into a kind of Gothic lecture hall. But on the page, that same lesson is not merely intimidating. It is an ambush. It is a small, controlled act of public humiliation that sets the tone for years of fear. In the book, Snape begins with those rapid-fire questions hurled at an 11-year-old who has never opened a potions text beyond his summer reading. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" he demands, not as a teacher gauging knowledge, but as a man searching for a weakness. When Harry cannot answer, the silence stretches. Then comes the sneering dismissal of Hermione, hand straining in the air, punished not for ignorance, but for eagerness. Points are stripped from Gryffindor in those first minutes, not for mischief, but for confusion. Tonight, we're diving into the difference between that written cruelty and the more restrained version the films gave us. In the movie, Rickman's Snape is cutting, but almost scholarly, his insults measured, his sarcasm wrapped in wit. Many of the most vicious repetitions, the relentless needling, simply vanish. The class feels harsh but survivable. In the book, it feels like the opening of a long siege. To understand why this matters for an HBO retelling, we have to understand the smaller, darker details the text lingers on. Snape's fixation on Neville's fear, for instance, is not a single moment. It is a pattern. He hovers over the trembling boy's cauldron, anticipating disaster, and when the potion goes wrong, he seems almost pleased by the opportunity to wound. Imagine a world where the camera does not cut away from Neville's shaking hands, from the sheen of sweat on his forehead, from the quiet, desperate glances he casts at Hermione for help. With modern television pacing, that classroom becomes a theater of power. The lens can stay low, at desk level, so we feel the looming sweep of Snape's robes as he passes. It can rest on Harry's face as he realizes that his fame offers no protection here, then drift to the other students. Some frightened, some enthralled, some already learning that in this corner of the wizarding world, survival means staying invisible. We might even see, in a close-up, the flicker of satisfaction in Snape's eyes when a child flinches. Now, back to the video, and to the question beneath all of this. If HBO restores these textual details, what happens to our idea of Snape as a secretly kind guardian? He becomes something more uncomfortable, more human, a deeply flawed adult whose later bravery does not erase his cruelty. As we peel back the layers of this history, we find a man who can save a life in one chapter and crush a spirit in the next. And the next scene we revisit may make that contradiction feel even sharper. And nowhere is that contradiction sharper than in the quiet, echoing dungeon where Snape enters Harry's mind. Tonight, we're diving into those occlumency lessons in Order of the Phoenix, because this is where the story stops being abstract cruelty and becomes something far more intimate and far more unsettling. In the books, these lessons are abrupt, invasive, and often cruel. There is no gentle preparation, no careful explanation of this ancient branch of magic. Snape simply orders Harry to clear his mind, offers almost no real guidance, and then strikes without warning, the word legilimens, cracking through the air as Harry's memories burst open. We often think of training as a partnership. Here, it is an assault. Each attempt is a small act of violation. Harry is thrown again and again into scenes of his own fear and shame. Dudley's fists, Dementors on a frozen lake, the graveyard where Voldemort returned. Snape watches, unmoved or faintly pleased, criticizing Harry for weakness while doing almost nothing to help him grow stronger. Sometimes he mocks, sometimes he sneers, but always he seems to take a cold satisfaction in how much it hurts. The films compress all of this into something closer to an intense montage. Flashes of wand work, a few sharp lines, Alan Rickman's voice coiled and controlled. To understand why our memory of Snape feels different, we have to understand how this compression softens him. On screen, the emphasis leans toward rigorous training against a dark enemy. On the page, the emphasis is on an adult using power to break a child's defenses and then blaming him for shattering. Then comes the pattern break, the moment that changes everything. One night, Harry turns the spell back on Snape and falls, suddenly, into the professor's worst memory. His father and Sirius tormenting him by the lake, Lily watching, humiliation pressed into every jeer and every helpless gesture. In the book, Snape's reaction is not quiet sorrow. It is white-hot fury and exposed shame. He throws Harry out, ends the lessons at once, and his hatred, already deep, hardens into something almost irrevocable. Imagine a world where an HBO adaptation slows all of this down. The silence before each attempt, the rustle of robes, the way Snape's eyes narrow, the way Harry braces, the way memories slam open and leave him staggering, breathless, against a desk. As we peel back the layers of this history, the dungeon becomes less a classroom and more a battleground of minds and old wounds. Now, back to the video. If we lingered longer on Snape's inner turmoil, on the flicker of recognition when he sees his own younger self in Harry's pain, yet also on the sharpness of his contempt, what would we feel? Was he protecting Harry from Voldemort, punishing him for existing, or doing both at once in a way that never fully redeems him? And if HBO leans into that unease, what other familiar scenes might begin to feel entirely new? To understand why this unease matters, we have to understand where Snape stands when the war truly reignites. By the time we reach the era of the Order of the Phoenix, he is no longer just the bitter teacher in the dungeon, and not yet the tragic guardian framed by a silver doe. He is something far more precarious, a man walking a blade between two worlds. In the books, Dumbledore does not simply tolerate Snape. He trusts him with the most dangerous role the Order can offer. Snape returns to Voldemort's side as a marked Death Eater, feeding the Dark Lord enough truth to survive, while quietly carrying back secrets to the headmaster and the hidden house at Grimmauld Place. Every summons is a risk. Every lie is a spell cast against the darkness with no wand raised, only a steady voice and an unreadable face. We often think of the Order as a warm, united resistance. But in that old black townhouse, Snape is an intruder even among allies. His tense exchanges with Moody, who sees constant treachery, and Sirius, who sees the boy from the lake still wearing Slytherin colors, reveal a web of grudges that the films only gesture toward. Sometimes they spar in clipped, venomous sentences. Sometimes they trade professional information with a cold sort of respect. But always, there is the sense that every conversation might detonate. Beyond the arguments, the books place Snape at the quiet heart of the Order's work. He helps guard the Fidelius-protected Grimmauld Place, slipping through its ancient corridors as both guest and jailer. He brews complex potions for the wounded and the wary. He becomes a conduit of information, shuttling between Voldemort's counsels and Dumbledore's strategies, carrying the weight of two masters and belonging fully to neither. Imagine a world where we actually see those nights, where the camera lingers on the empty kitchen after everyone else has gone to bed, and Snape is still at the table, ink-stained, exhausted, and alone. Tonight, we're diving into how an HBO series could finally give those moments space to breathe. In a longer, more patient format, those off-page missions can become full sequences. Snape arriving at Grimmauld Place in the dead of night, cloak damp with rain. A brief, barbed exchange with Sirius by the fire. A silent scene in the basement where he stirs a cauldron for the Order while his dark mark burns just out of sight. At Hogwarts, he remains cold, clipped, merciless in class. But away from the castle, we begin to see competence, strain, and a bone-deep isolation that even Dumbledore cannot fully relieve. As we peel back the layers of this history, Snape stops being only the classroom villain or the secret hero revealed in a rush of memories. He becomes a working spy whose life is one long, weary compromise, every choice half salvation and half betrayal. And if HBO restores these sleeping subplots, what will it do, not just to our sympathy for him, but to our understanding of what the Order was willing to ask of one man? And within that weary compromise, another secret waits in the shadows of a schoolbook. A name, inked in the margins of a battered potions text that once let Severus Snape imagine he was someone else entirely. We often think of the Half-Blood Prince as a convenient mystery for Harry, a helpful ghost hand guiding his wand through sixth-year homework. But to understand why that title matters, we have to understand whose handwriting curls between those printed lines, and what it meant for a lonely boy from Spinner's End to sign himself with a crown. The reveal in the book is simple. The annotations are Snape's. The Half-Blood Prince is Severus, stitching together his witch mother's maiden name, Prince, with the half-blood status he both resents and claims. It is an alias, but it is also a confession. In that self-chosen title, you can feel his pride in Eileen Prince's magical lineage and his bitterness toward the Muggle father whose name he wears in public. He does not want to be Tobias Snape's son, trapped in a small, damp house where magic is a source of fear and anger. He wants to be the half-blood prince, a figure of power, a boy who rewrites recipes, invents spells, and bends the rules of the wizarding world in the quiet safety of a school desk. The films gesture toward this, but they move past it quickly, almost gently. The psychological weight of the name, the teenage persona behind it, remains mostly off-screen. We see an old textbook, we hear a brief explanation, and then the story hurries on toward the tower and the wand and the fall. The ancient, private mythology that Severus built for himself as a teenager, the one that still echoes in his adult choices, is left sleeping between the pages. Imagine a world where HBO lets us linger there. Tonight, we're diving into a vision of Half-Blood Prince that is not just a plot twist, but a haunting parallel. We move between timelines. Young Severus, hair hanging over his eyes, scribbling counter-curses and brutal new hexes in the margins, while, in the present, Professor Snape glides between cauldrons, his voice soft and cutting. Sometimes the camera rests on the same desk, sometimes on the same inky phrase, but always on the gap between who he wanted to be and who he became. As we peel back the layers, this self-mythologizing turns him into something more tragic. He is not only the spy trapped inside Dumbledore's long game, he is also an author trapped inside someone else's story, a boy who once believed a new name could free him, only to find that every identity he chose was claimed by another master. And if HBO leans into that, if we watch the Half-Blood Prince writing his own legend in real time, what happens when that legend collides with Lily, with the Marauders, and with the darkness he thinks will finally make him matter? And on the night when that legend is tested, we follow him not into a classroom or a memory, but into a sitting room heavy with fear and firelight. Tonight, we're diving into the unbreakable vow, that ancient spell that does not care about motive, that only cares that a promise is fulfilled or a life is forfeit. Imagine a world where duty itself has teeth. Narcissa Malfoy arrives at Spinner's End, shaking, desperate to save her son from the task Voldemort has set, while Bellatrix prowls the edges of the scene, suspicious and hungry for proof. We often think of Snape as composed, but here in the book, his calm is almost eerie, a still surface over deep, unseen currents. He reassures Narcissa, parries Bellatrix's accusations, and then, without visible hesitation, offers his wand and his life to seal Draco's mission as his own. To understand why this matters, we have to understand that he is already bound to Dumbledore by a different, secret promise. Up on the lightning-struck tower, those two oaths collide. In the book, we reach the top with Harry frozen under his invisibility cloak, body locked by Dumbledore's spell, forced to watch. Death Eaters jeer, Draco trembles, and then Snape arrives, black robes cutting through the chaos. Dumbledore looks at him, and the text only tells us that he pleads. No explanation, no stage direction, just that one terrible look. Snape raises his wand. The green light bursts forth. Dumbledore falls backwards into the night. It is clean, it is final. And for Harry, and for us on the page, it is unforgivable. The film softens this with a different kind of magic. Alan Rickman's sorrowful eyes, the tremor in his voice, the sense of tragic inevitability, as though he is walking a path laid out long before. The camera almost defends him, tilting toward the idea that he must be doing this for a reason, inviting us to guess the twist years before the memories reveal it. In the book, that sympathy is withheld. Harry chases Snape through the grounds, screaming, and every line insists on one thing. This man is a murderer. Now, back to the video. If HBO chooses to follow the text more ruthlessly, they might strip away those visible cracks, keeping Snape's face unreadable on the tower, his movements precise, his voice cold. No lingering shot on conflicted eyes, no whispered apology. Just duty, executed without ornament, forcing you to sit in the horror until the story is ready to unlock its secrets. As we peel back the layers of this history, we have to ask, would a tower scene with less romance and less visible regret make his later redemption in the pensive burn brighter, or would it push him so far into darkness that some of you never fully come back? And if HBO takes that risk, what does it do to the prophecy of the bravest man when we finally step inside his memories and see the cost? And that brings us to the quietest, loudest moment of all. The one word that reshapes the history of a man we thought we knew. Tonight, we're diving into the silver-blue glow of a single spell and the memories that rise around it like mist. In the book, the always scene is almost austere. Snape stands in Dumbledore's office, worn down by years of double life and ancient darkness, and when Dumbledore questions his loyalty to the boy, Snape answers without argument. He casts his Patronus, and out of his wand spills not a generic shield of light, but a doe. Lily's doe. Dumbledore is shaken. This is not what he expected from a Death Eater turned spy. After all this time, he asks. Always, Snape replies, and in that single exchange, we suddenly understand that his allegiance is rooted in a lifelong, unyielding love. The films take that sparse, almost clinical revelation and wrap it in reverence. We often think of that scene bathed in soft light and aching music, the camera lingering on Alan Rickman's face, the word always delivered as a sacred vow. The framing encourages us to see Snape as a tragic, noble guardian, a man whose every harsh word was secretly in service of a higher, purer devotion. It is romantic, in the oldest sense of the word. It sanctifies him. But on the page, that sanctification is not simple. To understand why, we have to understand the memories Harry falls into in the pensive. In a matter of pages, we move through a compressed lifetime. The shy boy watching Lily conjure petals on a playground. The awkward, fragile friendship that blooms between them. The worst memory, where teenage Snape, humiliated by James and Sirius, lashes out and calls Lily Mudblood. We see his guilt when he realizes the prophecy he carried to Voldemort has doomed her, and the desperate bargain he makes with Dumbledore. We see years of dangerous work as a double agent, coded messages and occlumency and lonely corridors, all packed into a flurry of scenes that redefine his story at the very end. Imagine a world where those fragments are not confined to a final rush, but woven through the narrative from the beginning. An HBO series, with hours across seasons, could let us live inside those memories instead of glimpsing them as a last-minute twist. Sometimes as gentle childhood flashbacks when Harry passes the swings where Lily once played. Sometimes as jagged intrusions during occlumency lessons when Snape's own mind betrays him. Now, back to the video, and to what that would do to the way we feel about Always. Because if we spend more time with him, we will not only see the boy who loved, we will also see the man who belittles Neville, who mocks Hermione's teeth, who fixates on old grudges with a bitterness that never quite heals. As we peel back the layers, his bravery and his possessiveness stand side by side. Does Always then feel like redemption, a hard-earned grace at the end of a brutal journey? Or does it become a haunting refrain, the echo of a love that never learned how to be kind, binding him to Lily's memory without ever freeing him? or Harry from the harm he caused? In a slower, more expansive telling, that question does not have to be answered in a single word. It can linger, unsettled, as we move toward the final battle and the last time Harry looks into Snape's eyes and sees what has been there, always waiting to be understood. And as that unanswered question hangs in the air between you and the page, we arrive at another uncertainty. Whose face, whose voice will carry this new Snape through the darkness of the story? We often think of Snape, instinctively, in Alan Rickman's cadence. For many of us, his measured pauses, that low, velvety tone, have become the sound of Snape's dialogue in our minds, even when we are reading alone in bed. He did not just play a character. He set the template for an entire generation's understanding of this man's history, his cruelty, and his buried loyalty. Tonight, we're diving into the strange vulnerability of recasting a legend. Any new actor will step into a role that feels almost sacred, aware that every line they speak will be silently echoed by a memory of Rickman's voice. To understand why this is so daunting, we have to understand how completely the films fused Snape's image with that performance. Tall, elegant, controlled, a Gothic figure gliding through candlelit corridors, more spectre than schoolmaster. But the books describe someone harsher. Imagine a world where HBO chooses a Snape closer to that written description. Sallow skin, greasy hair, a hooked nose, a man who looks not ageless and statuesque, but exhausted, unhealthy, worn down by years of double life and self-inflicted isolation. In the early seasons, he could even look startlingly young beside the other teachers, a reminder that, long before he became a legend, he was once a boy from Spinner's End who never really escaped. The voice could change everything. Instead of that smooth, theatrical baritone, we might hear something sharper, more nasal, with an edge that cuts rather than caresses. Each word in the classroom could sound like a reprimand waiting to happen, so that when he says, clearly, fame isn't everything, it feels less like a dry aside and more like a genuine wound being pressed, again and again. Performance choices might tilt the balance as well. Where Rickman often played Snape as cool, almost immovable, HBO might ask for volatility, sudden flares of anger, a hand slamming on a desk, a sneer that is not stylish but petty. The potions dungeon could feel less like the lair of a Gothic antihero and more like walking on broken glass, every breath measured, every mistake punished. Would we still root for him then, or would we simply endure him, as the students do? Now, back to the video. HBO may even lean away from mimicry on purpose, encouraging a performance that is rawer, more visibly wounded, less immediately charismatic. At first, that might provoke resistance. We may miss the familiar silhouette, the ironic dignity. Yet a Snape who is genuinely unpleasant to be around, whose pain is not romantic but messy, could bring us closer to the book's difficult truth. So you might gently ask yourself, if this new actor makes Snape someone you would truly fear having as a teacher, rather than someone you secretly admire from the safety of the audience, how does the prophecy of the bravest man feel then? And if the casting itself invites us to see him not as a dark guardian, but as a dangerously flawed adult in a school full of children, what will that change when we finally return to the night on the astronomy tower? And that brings us to the question beneath all the casting and costuming choices. What happens when the camera itself stops standing beside Harry and begins to drift? We often think of Snape as a figure glimpsed from the end of a school corridor, framed by a child's fear and a teenager's fury. But what if the world of this story finally lets us stand somewhere else? To understand why that matters, we have to understand how the books shape our gaze. For 7 volumes, we are pressed in close behind Harry's shoulder. We see Snape through memories of cupboard-dwelling terror, through the sting of unfair detentions, through whispered stories of Death Eaters and traitors. Harry does not know the prophecy, the promises, or the ancient bargains that bind this man to Dumbledore, so we do not know them either. His view is partial. His view is wounded. The films, in their own way, preserved that tunnel of perspective. The camera rarely strays far from Harry's orbit, so Snape remains an enigma on the edges of the frame, striding through darkness, cutting through classrooms, appearing in the Great Hall, and vanishing again before we can follow. Alan Rickman's performance hints at secrets centuries old, at knowledge and grief coiled behind his eyes, but the structure of the story keeps him sealed until the pensive finally opens in Deathly Hallows. Tonight, we're diving into the possibility that HBO may not keep him so distant. Imagine a world where, after a cruel remark in Potions, the scene does not cut away with Harry's humiliation. Instead, the camera lingers on Snape as the classroom empties, follows him through stone corridors, down into his office, or out of the castle entirely. We walk with him through Spinner's End, through Order of the Phoenix meetings, through late-night conversations with Dumbledore that Harry never hears. The story breathes differently when we are not always standing in the same place. As we peel back the layers of this new perspective, Snape could soften or harden before our eyes. We might see his loneliness in the quiet moments, his careful calculations as he balances 2 masters, his private grief when a silver doe crosses a winter forest. Or we might hear more of his ugliest thoughts, his contempt for students, his ingrained biases about blood and worth. Sometimes the camera could reveal a man broken by regret. Sometimes it could reveal a bully unsoftened by nostalgia, but always it would make him harder to romanticize from a distance. In that sense, the camera becomes a kind of living pensive. Each time it slips away from Harry and dips into Snape's memories, his rooms, his silent choices, it invites us to reinterpret the prophecy of the bravest man yet again. How often will we be allowed inside his point of view? How long will we stay there before returning to the boy who lived? Those decisions will quietly tell us whether this new Snape stands as hero, villain, or something far more unsettling in between, and they prepare us for the memories we have not yet seen. And if we stay with him, not in memories but in the present tense of a school year, another question rises quietly in the dark. What does it actually feel like to sit in Severus Snape's classroom day after day, with no music to soften the edges, no quick cut to the next adventure? Tonight, we're diving into the side of Snape that the films only brushed against, the relentless, ordinary cruelty of a teacher who wields power like a wand and a weapon. We often think of his lessons as dry, sardonic set pieces, but on the page they are something heavier, almost suffocating. Neville Longbottom, trembling over a cauldron, is not just a momentary joke. Snape stands over him, threatening to feed his beloved toad Trevor a potion if Neville fails, mocking his fear, turning a child's panic into entertainment for the room. Sometimes he sneers at Neville's terror. Sometimes he predicts the boy will poison someone one day, but always the message is the same. You are not safe here. Hermione Granger, too, becomes a target. In Goblet of Fire, when a hex enlarges her front teeth, the book lingers on Snape's reaction. He does not help. He does not even remain neutral. He tells her he sees no difference, belittling her appearance, her confidence, her very willingness to raise her hand. To understand why this matters, we have to understand how often he also dismisses students' efforts, sweeping aside imperfect work with contempt rather than guidance, using sarcasm where another teacher might use patience. On the page, this is not an occasional sharp comment. It is a pattern, stretching across years, where he humiliates students in front of their peers and lets Slytherins jeer without consequence. The films compress these moments into brief, darkly humorous exchanges, buoyed by Alan Rickman's elegant restraint and timing. They didn't just shorten the scenes. They shifted the tone, turning what is sustained emotional pressure into something closer to atmospheric color. Imagine a world where HBO restores the full weight of those chapters. A camera that does not cut away when Neville's potion melts, that lingers on Hermione's face after the teeth remark, that follows a first year back to the dormitory after being told their best effort is worthless. As we peel back the layers of this history of classroom scenes, HBO will have to choose. Do they portray this unflinchingly, risking a steady ache of viewer discomfort, or do they soften it again and drift further from the ancient, colder text? Modern audiences carry a different awareness of abusive authority than readers did decades ago. In a world where we speak more openly about toxic teachers and bullying, a book-accurate Snape may feel less like a misunderstood anti-hero and more like a cautionary figure, a reminder of how darkness can hide in ordinary rooms under flickering torchlight. Would watching this, week after week, make it harder to accept Harry later calling him the bravest man he ever knew? Or would the contrast make his final choices feel even more costly, a redemption that must climb over years of damage? Now, back to the video, we turn to how those choices might be framed when the story reaches its end. To understand why Snape's later sacrifices feel so charged, we have to understand the first, quiet bond that defined his life. Long before prophecies and dark marks, there were two children on a scruffy street, watching the reeds sway by a hidden river, discovering that magic answered them when the ordinary world did not. Imagine a world shrunk down to that riverbank. Lily Evans leaping across stones, petals opening in her hands. Severus, thin and watchful, naming the currents of the wizarding world she has never seen. There is genuine warmth there, and curiosity, and the small, fierce loyalty of children who believe they have found the one person who truly understands them. But even in those early days, shadows gather at the edges. His home steeped in bitterness, her home bright, if bewildered. Two orbits, already pulling away. As we peel back the layers of their Hogwarts years, the distance widens. Lily is welcomed into Gryffindor's easy laughter and principled courage. Snape drifts toward the ancient darkness of Slytherin's blood purity circles, drawn to secrets, to power, to friends who promise he will never be weak again. Sometimes they share a glance in a corridor, sometimes a tense exchange by the lake, but always the choice of who to stand beside grows heavier. Then comes the word that splits their story: mudblood. One moment of humiliation, one slur hurled in panic and pride, and the river between them becomes a chasm. We often think of this as a single, terrible slip. Yet in the books, what follows is just as revealing. Snape cannot offer the apology Lily needs. He will not renounce the friends who sneer at her very existence. His refusal to change his associations is not only hurt, it is prejudice, laid bare. Tonight, we're diving into that uncomfortable question fans have wrestled with for years. Is what Snape feels for Lily enduring love, or an obsession frozen in the amber of childhood? He clings to the memory of the girl by the river, even as the woman she becomes chooses a different path, a different man, a different future. Love can release. Obsession holds on so tightly it cannot see the person, only the loss. An HBO series, with hours to linger, could let us see Lily as more than the ghost in Snape's memories. Quiet scenes under willow branches, sharp, whispered arguments in castle corridors. Moments in which we follow her away from him, studying with other friends, debating the rising darkness, choosing James not as a cruel contrast to Snape, but as someone who grew, who changed, who met her where she stood, her agency, her reasons, her final decision to walk away. If we feel Lily's life as a full story rather than a backdrop, how might that shift the way we judge everything Snape later does for her? Are we watching a man honoring a great love, or a man trying to rewrite a choice she already made? And when the series turns to the night on the hill, to the green light and the broken house, will that answer feel simple, or far more unsettling? To understand why that answer may never feel simple again, we have to understand the boys who shaped the man Snape became. We often think of the Marauders as golden heroes of an earlier age, names engraved in the history of the Order, faces we glimpse in photographs, laughing in the sun. But before they were martyrs and legends, they were teenagers with wands, with power, and with an audience. Long before Harry ever sat in a potions classroom, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter ruled the school corridors in their own small kingdom. They were brilliant, daring, and charismatic, the sort of wizards teachers praised in staff rooms and students whispered about in the common room. They were also, at times, cruel. Not in the grand, ancient darkness of a Dark Lord, but in the sharper, more intimate darkness of a group that knows exactly where your weakest point is and chooses to press on it anyway. Tonight, we're diving into those sunlit memories that are not as gentle as they first appear. In the books, the cruelty is not hidden. We watch James dangle Snape upside down in front of a crowd, robes over his head, while Sirius laughs and Remus looks away. We hear the jeers about Greece and poverty, the casual threat to strip him naked, the way Snape's wand is taken, his dignity disassembled piece by piece, and around them, the adults we admire do not rush in. A teacher glances over and moves on. Even Dumbledore, guardian of so many children, lets the story settle into the background hum of "Boys will be boys." Imagine a world where an HBO series lingers in that moment, where the camera doesn't cut away as quickly as the films did, where the music doesn't soften the edges into nostalgia. The movies bathed the Marauders in a warm, forgiving glow, presenting them mostly through Harry's longing for the father he never knew. Their worst sins became brief flashes, memories framed as youthful mischief, so that Snape's resentment could seem petty, an old grudge he should have outgrown. But what if we returned to the lake from two angles at once? One episode might show us the scene as the Marauders remember it, a prank that went too far, laughter shading into discomfort, a sense that this is what popular boys do. Another might replay the same afternoon through Snape's eyes, the helplessness, the humiliation, the knowledge that no one will intervene. The same spells, the same sunlight, a different world. As we peel back the layers of these parallel stories, a subtler prophecy emerges, one not spoken in a hall of glass or written in a book of omens. No one here is entirely victim or villain. James can be brave and a bully. Sirius can be loyal and reckless with another boy's safety. Snape can be wounded and still choose darkness. In that tension, an HBO retelling could let us rest with an uncomfortable truth. His bitterness becomes understandable without becoming absolution, a scar we can trace without ever mistaking it for a halo. Now, back to the video, and to the years when that bitterness becomes a doorway Voldemort is all too ready to open. That doorway does not open onto Voldemort alone. it opens onto Dumbledore as well, and onto a partnership that is far less simple than the films allow us to remember. We often think of Dumbledore and Snape as an almost sacred alliance, the wise headmaster, the tragic spy, united by prophecy and purpose. But to understand why HBO's version might feel different, we have to understand how their relationship reads on the page, in those sharp, private conversations where the mask of school life falls away and something colder, older, and more wounded emerges. In the books, their meetings are not gentle mentoring sessions. They are clashes in shadowed offices and deserted corridors, where Dumbledore's voice turns suddenly hard and Snape's temper flares, and we glimpse two men who are not only hiding secrets from the world, but from each other. Sometimes Dumbledore presses, sometimes Snape resists, but always there is the sense of a bargain that neither can fully name, bound up with ancient magic, guilt, and a war no one is winning. The films smooth this out. Alan Rickman's quiet gravity, paired with a benevolent, almost grandfatherly Dumbledore, encourages us to see a simple pattern. Dumbledore, the luminous strategist, Snape, the loyal, burdened agent, carrying out terrible tasks for a greater good. The camera rarely lingers on the ethical cracks, on how much is demanded of one damaged man, or on the way Dumbledore's kindness and distance coexist in the same steady gaze. Imagine a world where we stay longer in those conversations. When Dumbledore insists that Snape protect Harry for Lily's sake, the words are not only a tribute to love, they are a blade turned in an old wound. When he later asks Snape to be the one to kill him, it is framed as mercy and strategy, but it is also emotional leverage, a headmaster using the very guilt and devotion he once tried to soothe. These are not neutral requests, they are life sentences. Tonight, we're diving into the possibility that HBO leans into this tension instead of softening it. As we peel back the layers of this history, we could see a Dumbledore who genuinely cares for Snape, who worries over his safety, who trusts his courage, and yet still moves him across the chessboard with a clarity that borders on ruthlessness. Affection does not erase manipulation. It only makes it more painful to watch. In that telling, Snape becomes more than a man trudging toward redemption. He becomes a man partly redeemed and partly exploited, a weapon honed by a leader who sees the whole war when everyone else can only see their own scars. And as we follow their alliance through the years, we may start to ask a quieter, more unsettling question. Who is saving whom? And at what cost to both? Now, back to the video, and to the first years of that uneasy partnership, when a Death Eater walked into a headmaster's office and changed the course of wizarding history. He walks into that office as a supplicant. He leaves it as something far more precarious, a man balanced between two masters who could both destroy him. To understand why this matters for an HBO retelling, we have to understand Snape not only as a bitter teacher or a grieving lover, but as one of Voldemort's most trusted lieutenants. In the shadowed hierarchy of the Death Eaters, he is not just another black-robed follower. He is an advisor, a strategist, the mind the Dark Lord turns to for potions, for counter-curses, for interpretations of prophecy that might tilt the entire wizarding war. Voldemort believes him. That belief is Snape's greatest weapon and his most suffocating prison. We often think of Voldemort's inner circle as a blur of masks and skulls, but the books linger on moments where Snape must stand alone before that ancient, inhuman face. In the graveyard after Voldemort's return, in the drawing room at Malfoy Manor, in the quiet summons that tear him from Hogwarts at midnight, he is forever walking a narrow bridge. Sometimes he offers real intelligence from the Order. Sometimes he offers carefully curated truths, trimmed of anything that would expose Dumbledore's plans or Harry's protection. But always, he must sound convincing enough that a legilimens tyrant does not look too closely. Tonight, we're diving into those conversations that the films only hint at. On screen, we see flashes: Voldemort gliding among the Death Eaters, Bellatrix preening, Lucius trembling. Snape is there, but often at the edges, a silent silhouette in the smoke. The camera rarely stays on his eyes as he calculates which half-truth will keep everyone alive for one more night. The books, though, suggest a longer, quieter history of meetings, of reports, of those chilling moments when the dark mark burns and Snape must decide how much of himself to bring. Imagine a world where HBO slows all of this down, where we sit in Malfoy Manor through the entire meeting, watching Snape's hands remain perfectly still while his shoulders are just a fraction too tight, where every sentence he speaks to Voldemort is a small performance, weighed and measured with the knowledge that one misplaced word could end not only his mission, but the fragile hope of the Order. Sometimes he flatters. Sometimes he disagrees, very softly, but always he survives. As we peel back the layers of this double life, a different kind of bravery comes into view. Not the symbolic courage of a single final sacrifice, but the relentless courage of waking every day to serve a master you fear, in order to serve a cause you barely trust. An HBO series could let us feel that constant, low-level terror, the way centuries of dark magic seem to press in on those meetings without ever forgiving the earlier darkness Snape chose. And as we watch him walk back and forth across that lethal line, we may begin to wonder, what happens the night he finally slips? And yet, for all that danger, Snape is also someone we mostly remember in silhouette. We often think of him first as an outline in the doorway, those tailored black robes billowing behind him, a kind of human shadow gliding along the stone. The films wrapped him in a Gothic elegance, every seam precise, every button fastened, turning his very presence into a piece of theater. Those robes did more than clothe him. They edited him. The fabric flowed in clean, dramatic lines, smoothing out the pettiness, the insecurity, the very ordinary bitterness we meet on the page. He became a dark guardian at the edge of the story, more wraith than man, and the wizarding world around him echoed that choice with candlelit corridors and romantic clouds of potion steam softening his cruelty into something almost mythic. Imagine a world where HBO resists that temptation, where, in the privacy of Spinner's End, the robes are still black, but the black has faded, the hems are frayed, and the cuffs are shiny from years of wear. The buttons do not all match. The seams pull a little when he moves. Suddenly, we are not looking at a Gothic archetype. We are looking at a man who has never stopped feeling poor. To understand why this matters, we have to understand how much the books anchor Snape in class and discomfort. His childhood home is cramped, damp, and tense. An HBO set could lean into that, peeling wallpaper, low ceilings, shelves bowing under the weight of second-hand books and chipped potion jars, a single armchair with the stuffing showing through. No grand, swirling camera movement, just a small, airless room where the darkness is not magical, but mundane. Then, as we move into Hogwarts, the production design can keep telling the story. His dungeon classroom need not be romantically eerie. It can be cluttered, cramped, with overfull cupboards and stained tables, the air heavy with the smell of ingredients that have been stretched too far past their prime. Sometimes the camera lingers on his ink-stained fingers, sometimes on a cracked cauldron he has repaired instead of replaced. But always the world around him whispers, "This man hoards. This man endures." Lighting becomes another kind of prophecy. In class, the light can be harsh and unforgiving, thrown down from high, cold torches that carve deep shadows under his eyes and exaggerate every sneer. But in the rare moments when he lets his guard slip, HBO could soften the frame. Lamplight pooling on a desk at midnight, rain-silvered windows in Spinner's End, a single candle beside a memory vial, the same face, the same robes, but suddenly more human. Do we feel the difference? As we peel back the layers of costume and stone and light, Snape's world can shift from stylized legend to weary reality. By making his environment less romantic and more grounded, HBO has the power to pull him closer to the flawed, exhausted man on the page and a little farther from the elegant specter of the films. And once the world around him changes, what happens when we finally step inside his mind? And once the world around him changes, what happens when we finally step inside his mind? Tonight, we're diving into the sounds that might greet us there, because in a story woven with prophecy and ancient magic, it is often the quietest details that decide how we feel. We often think of Snape's redemption through the lens of the original film's music. In Deathly Hallows Part 2, when Harry watches those memories in the pensive, swelling strings and a tender leitmotif rise up to cradle us, guiding our hearts towards sympathy even as we discover some of Snape's darkest secrets. The score tells us, almost unmistakably, that this is tragic love, that this is sacrifice, that this is the moment we are meant to forgive. To understand why HBO's version could feel so different, we have to understand how much those musical choices shaped the story. They did not just accompany Snape's memories, they interpreted them for us, softening the edges of his cruelty, smoothing over the centuries of bitterness and anger that define his place in the wizarding world. What happens if that musical hand on our shoulder is suddenly removed? Imagine a world where HBO leans into restraint instead. Long stretches of silence in his classroom, only the faint drip of a potion, the low hum of a cauldron, the scratch of quills in tense, unbroken air. No immediate cue that this is a man we should pity. No comforting melody to tell us how to feel. Just the weight of his words, and the uncomfortable awareness of how he wields his power over children. In that approach, Snape's private moments might carry their own sparse, melancholic motifs, almost too fragile to hum, returning only in fragments when we glimpse him alone. A single, distant piano line at Spinner's End, a thin thread of strings when he looks at Lily's Patronus or pauses outside the headmaster's office. Then, in contrast, harsher, discordant sounds could underscore his lessons, the faintest metallic scrape, or low, dissonant chords shadowing every insult to Neville, every cutting remark to Hermione, refusing to let the score over-romanticize him. As we peel back the layers of this soundscape, we find an auditory portrait of isolation, the echo of his footsteps in empty stone corridors long after curfew, the soft crackle of a fire in a narrow sitting room, rain whispering against the windows of Spinner's End. The murmured roar of the great hall heard from far away, reminding us that there is a world of warmth and community from which he remains forever slightly apart. By letting silence speak more often, HBO could invite you to sit with your own discomfort and questions about Snape. Is this bravery or obsession? Is this love or possession? Without the constant reassurance of a sympathetic theme, we are left alone with the darkness and the ambiguity. And once sound and silence reshape how we feel about him, what happens when the camera finally lingers on his face, and the performance itself begins to challenge everything the music once told us to believe? When the music falls away, and the camera finally rests on Snape's face, we arrive at another kind of question. Not just who he is, but when we are allowed to know him. Structure is its own quiet magic. It does not change the facts of a life, yet by shifting the order of revelations, it can transform a villain into a guardian, a bully into a tragic figure, a name into a prophecy fulfilled. We often think of Snape's truth as something that belongs to the very end. In the books, almost all of his real story is locked away until those final, shattering chapters of Deathly Hallows, when Harry gathers the silvery strands of memory and pours them into the pensieve. They didn't just add a detail or two, they detonated the narrative. Suddenly, the sneers, the punishments, the occlumency lessons, the warnings, even the hatred, are reframed in one long, aching rush. The films follow that same pattern, but they compress it even further. Alan Rickman's entire hidden life is revealed in a single, devastating montage. The Do Patronus, the promise to Dumbledore, the whispered always. It is swift and overwhelming, encouraging us to reevaluate years of wizarding history in a matter of minutes. You barely have time to breathe before the story is already moving toward its end. One spell, one revelation, one emotional verdict. Tonight, we're diving into what happens if HBO refuses to wait that long. Imagine a world where Snape's past is not a final key, but a series of shadows cast across the whole story. The series could see brief flashbacks from the very first season. A boy on a playground, watching a red-haired girl make a flower bloom. A teenager in a dark robe, branded with a skull and serpent. A young man kneeling before Dumbledore under the weight of unbearable regret. Small fragments, no explanations, just questions. Or the show could offer a bold alternative, an entire episode in the middle of the saga devoted to his memories, long before Harry walks to the forest. To understand why a teacher can be so cruel and yet so protective, we have to understand the childhood bullying, the marauder's casual cruelty, the moment he hears the prophecy that will doom the woman he loves. Spread across an hour, his life would feel less like a twist and more like a parallel story that has been running beside Harry's all along. There is another path as well. HBO could intercut Snape's past directly into key present-day scenes. Flashes of Lily's face when he stares at Harry, echoes of Death Eater meetings when he reports to the Order, glimpses of his first meeting with Voldemort as he stands on the astronomy tower. Sometimes the memory would soften him, sometimes it would darken him, but always it would complicate him. Each choice casts a different spell over us. If the memories are saved for the end, we feel the late, shocking revelation. Snape remains mysterious, even monstrous, until the curtain finally falls. If the truth seeps in slowly, we experience a long, slow-burn understanding, in which he is never simply hero or villain, but something wounded and volatile from the start. Structure decides whether we forgive him in a rush of tears or whether we spend years unsure if we should forgive him at all. As we peel back the layers of this history, structure itself begins to look like a kind of spellwork, shaping not just what we know, but the precise moment we are allowed to feel it. And if HBO dares to rearrange those memories, then the Snape we meet may feel so different that even his most famous word will carry a new meaning, one that might not say always at all. And if that single word can be rewritten, then so can the voices that surround it, because Snape is never only who he believes himself to be, he is also who the other adults at Hogwarts quietly decide he is, in staff rooms and shadowed corridors we almost never see. We often think of Hogwarts through Harry's eyes, but the school is also a workplace, a fragile institution held together by tired, brilliant, deeply opinionated adults. To understand why HBO's version of Snape could feel so different, we have to understand how those adults see him and how rarely the films let us linger in their world. The books give us glimmers, McGonagall's clipped disapproval, Lupin's weary caution, Hagrid's blunt judgments that sometimes cut closer to the bone than he realizes. Imagine a world where we actually sit in the staff room as they talk. In the novels, McGonagall acknowledges Snape's extraordinary skill, yet she does not hesitate to challenge him, whether it is his favoritism toward Slytherin or his harshness with Neville. Lupin, remembering schoolboy humiliations and that near-fatal night with the Shrieking Shack, still calls him a very skilled wizard, and admits that Snape once brewed the Wolfsbane potion for him with meticulous care, respect for his magic, concern for his methods, admiration and unease braided together. On screen, those tensions are mostly swallowed by crisis. The staff gather when a troll is loose, when Sirius escapes, when the castle must be defended, but we almost never see them in the quiet in between. No shared tea in the staff room, no murmured argument over curriculum, no Order of the Phoenix meeting where someone finally says, in a low voice, "Can we truly trust Severus?" And someone else answers, just as softly, "We may have no choice." Tonight, we're diving into the spaces between battles, because that is where character hardens. An HBO series has time to linger. It can hold on a staff room conversation after Harry leaves, or follow McGonagall and Sprout down a corridor as they debate Snape's treatment of students. It can show Lupin and Tonks in a dimly lit Order safehouse, discussing his long history with Severus, or Hagrid in his hut, telling Madame Maxime that Snape is all right, deep down, even as he admits he does not understand the man at all, sometimes defending him, sometimes doubting him, but always circling back to the same uneasy question: who is he really serving? As we peel back the layers of this history, those adult perspectives become a kind of chorus, each voice refracting Snape through a different lens. McGonagall's standards for teaching, Lupin's scars from the Marauders era, Hagrid's simple sense of right and wrong, even Flitwick's quiet professionalism or Molly Weasley's ferocious protectiveness could all press against any single narrative of villain or martyr. Now, back to the video. Imagine how different Snape will feel if we spend real time with him as a difficult colleague in a castle under siege, not just a tragic silhouette at the edge of Harry's story. The next version of Snape might not be softer or crueler, but simply more surrounded. And in that surrounding, more human. And if we surround him not just with colleagues, but with children, the picture grows even more unsettling. We often think of Snape through Harry's eyes alone, a dark silhouette at the end of a dungeon corridor. But to understand why HBO's version might feel so different, we have to understand how he moves through a classroom full of young, frightened faces. Take Neville Longbottom. A shy boy, already haunted by family expectations and ancient trauma he barely understands. In the books, Snape does not merely ignore Neville, he singles him out, turns him into a living example of failure. He threatens to poison Trevor the Toad if Neville's potion is not perfect, forces him to brew under the kind of pressure that would rattle even a master, and lets the entire room watch. It is not one sharp comment. It is a pattern, repeated over years, until Neville's fear of this one teacher feels as real as any looming darkness outside the castle walls. Then there is Hermione. Brilliant, precise, desperate to prove that a Muggle-born girl can master the most ancient wizarding magic. On the page, Snape mocks her teeth, mocks her hair, mocks the very eagerness that other professors praise. He dismisses her correct answers with a curl of contempt, calls her an insufferable know-it-all, and does it in front of her peers. Sometimes it is a cutting remark, sometimes a cold silence, but always it lands on the same kind of student. the vulnerable one, the one already aware that the wizarding world might not welcome her completely. And yet, with Slytherins, the mask shifts. Imagine a world where we linger in those green-lit dungeons and see him with Draco Malfoy, not from across a hallway, but up close. Snape corrects Draco's wand grip, shields him from punishment, offers advice that sounds almost kind. Sometimes he is protective, sometimes he is instructive, but always he is aware of what these alliances can buy him. HBO has the time to show this double face, the teacher who crushes Neville's confidence and the mentor who quietly steadies Draco's hand. The film's gesture at all of this, then hurry on. A sneer here, a harsh word there, but not the slow accumulation of dread that the books describe across 5, 6, 7 school years. Tonight, we're diving into the version where we do not look away, where, as we peel back the layers of each term, we see small, recurring vignettes, a potion ruined because a child's hands are shaking, a wrong answer swallowed because Hermione no longer dares to speak, a Slytherin boy walking away with a rare, murmured word of praise. In a long-form series, those moments can stack like stones, quiet, almost forgettable on their own, but together forming a wall that even Snape's later heroism cannot fully break through. The prophecy, the war, the sacrifices will still come, but they will arrive in a world where you have watched him harm and help, belittle and protect, often in the same breath. And from there, we can step into an even more uncomfortable question. How does a man who teaches this way become the guardian of the boy he cannot bear to see? And from there, we step into the heart of the dilemma that hangs over this new adaptation like a quiet, lingering spell. What do we do with a man who is, at once, a bully in the classroom and a guardian in the shadows? Tonight, we're diving into the two main paths that HBO can take. One path follows the ancient lines of the books, showing us a Snape who is deeply flawed, often cruel, a teacher who mocks Neville until his potion explodes, who calls Hermione an insufferable know-it-all in front of her peers, who lets his own childhood wounds spill out as poison over a new generation. Yet this same man risks his life as a double agent, carries the weight of a prophecy, and walks, step by step, toward a death he has already accepted. He is brave. He is also, very often, unkind. The other path softens him again, as the films so gently did. We often think of Alan Rickman's elegant, controlled presence, the way his voice wrapped Snape in mystery rather than open cruelty, the way so many sharp edges from the page were smoothed into a tragic, almost romantic anti-hero. Imagine a world where HBO leans into that memory. Fewer cutting insults, more lingering shots on his grief for Lily, more emphasis on sacrifice than on the day-to-day harm he inflicts in his classroom. Each choice will shape how the wizarding world feels to you. If HBO follows the books closely, there may be discomfort and debate. We will have to understand that the man Harry calls the bravest he ever knew is also the man who terrorized children, that courage in war does not erase years of smaller, quieter abuses of power. Some viewers may turn away from that, while others may find the story richer, more honest, more in tune with the darkness that has always run beneath the magic. If they soften him, the response may be warmer, at least at first. Nostalgia is powerful. A familiar, mournful Snape, framed by music and shadow, can make the world feel safe again, can let us rest in the comfort of a redemption arc we already know by heart. But what gets lost when we do that? What happens to the story's warnings about bullying, about teachers who humiliate, about the dangerous prophecy of adults repeating their own pain through children? To understand why this choice matters, we have to understand the responsibility of adaptation in our own time. Long before this remake, readers were already wrestling with Snape's legacy. Was he an abused child who became an abuser? A hero who never learned how to be kind? Or something even more complicated? In a modern world, where conversations about power in schools and workplaces have shifted, showing his cruelty honestly is not an invitation to hate him. It is an invitation to sit with contradiction. We can acknowledge the boy who was tormented by the Marauders and the man who later torments Neville. We can honor the spy who shields Harry with his Patronus and still question the teacher who calls a grieving student attention-seeking. Sometimes compassion means understanding how someone became who they are. Sometimes it means refusing to excuse the harm they do. But always, it asks us to look steadily at the whole picture. So which Snape do you feel drawn toward in this new telling? A Snape who confirms the version you already love, whose courage glows brighter than his cruelty, or a Snape who unsettles you, who forces you to reconsider what bravery and redemption really look like when they are not bathed in soft light? As we peel back the layers of this history, we stand at that crossroads with HBO, wondering which path they will choose and what forgotten scenes from the books they might dare to restore next. And that crossroads offers a quiet gift. It lets us imagine a world where Severus Snape is not softened for us, not bathed in the glow of Alan Rickman's gravitas, but allowed to be as unnerving, as petty, and as wounded as he is on the page. We often think of Snape through the final verdict Harry gives him, the bravest man he ever knew. Yet in the books, that line rests on a foundation of years of cruelty, humiliation, and small, grinding abuses that the films blurred at the edges. A more book-accurate Snape, one who genuinely terrifies Neville in every potions lesson and cuts Hermione down with words about her teeth, would make the story's themes of choice and consequence feel less like myth and more like history. Bravery would not float above the darkness. It would move through it, stained by it. To understand why this matters, we have to understand what war really costs in the wizarding world. Resistance movements are rarely staffed by spotless saints. Sometimes they are led by people whose courage is inseparable from their bitterness, whose loyalty is fused to old grudges. Imagine a hero of the resistance who still bullies children, who still nurses prejudices, who still revels in power when he can get it. A Snape who is both Dumbledore's most essential weapon and one of Hogwarts's most damaging teachers forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. Real revolutions often rely on deeply flawed people. That shift would change where our empathy flows. In the films, Neville's shaking hands and Hermione's quick answers are framed through Harry's gaze, and Snape becomes a stern, almost theatrical obstacle. On the page, his darkness presses down on them day after day. A harsher Snape on screen would not simply make him more frightening. It would invite us to feel, more fully, the quiet heroism of a boy who still walks into that classroom, of a girl who still raises her hand. Their scars, emotional and otherwise, would no longer be a footnote under the legend of the boy who lived. Tonight, we're diving into that tension between admiration and revulsion. What happens when we are asked to hold both at once? A Snape whose bravery does not erase his cruelty, whose love for Lily does not magically cleanse years of spite, becomes an artistic challenge rather than a comfort. As we peel back the layers of this history, we find a man who is neither secret angel nor secret monster, but a human being whose choices never fully resolve into a single, tidy moral. For HBO, trusting that version of Snape would mean trusting you. It would mean believing that, Even in a world of prophecy and ancient magic, audiences can rest with ambiguity, can drift to sleep with a story that refuses to tell them exactly whom to forgive. Now, back to the video. We will see what it would take, in pacing, in casting, and in vision, to bring that darker, more human Snape to life on screen. And yet, as we drift deeper into this story, there is something we might feel ourselves holding on to. We often think of the film version of Snape as a kind of shadow guardian, a secret ally moving at the edges of the frame, cruel on the surface, but beneath it all, quietly good. That memory is comforting. It is the version many of us fell asleep to on late-night rewatches, wrapped in the soft glow of always. Alan Rickman's performance became a kind of spell over the wizarding world. The way he said Harry's name, the measured drawl in each potions lesson, the final revelation of his love for Lily, all of it suggested a man who had been noble all along, simply misunderstood by those around him. Imagine a world where the HBO series simply repeats that mood, that silhouette in black robes, that same restrained, tragic warmth. It would feel safe. It would feel familiar. But it might also make the character smaller. If we lean too heavily into Snape as the emblem of secret goodness, we risk turning him into a symbol instead of a person, an icon of unrequited love rather than a human being shaped by bitterness, jealousy, and choice. He did not just love Lily. He joined the Death Eaters. He did not just protect Harry. He humiliated Neville, mocked Hermione, and used his classroom as a place to wound. To understand why this matters, we have to understand how easily a gentle camera and mournful music can smooth those edges away. When a story centers his sacrifice and lets his cruelty fade into the background, something quiet but dangerous happens. His abuse begins to look excusable, even romantic, folded into a narrative where suffering is proof of depth, and harshness is simply the armor of a wounded heart. If HBO returns to that softer, nostalgic Snape without question, would we once again watch him terrorize children and then be told, in the end, that it was all worth it? That his pain cancels out theirs? Tonight, we're diving into a world where runtime is no longer an enemy. An HBO series has hours, even whole episodes, to explore regret, to show the long history of harm that cannot be undone by a single dough-shaped Patronus. As we peel back the layers of this history, we see the opportunity to trace every choice: the boy in Spinner's End, the young Death Eater, the double agent who never fully escapes the darkness he served. If the show chooses nostalgia instead, much of that potential remains in shadow. The expanded canvas becomes a repetition of the same few images, the same familiar beats, rather than a deeper meditation on what redemption costs and what it cannot pay back. Nostalgia is powerful. It lets us rest inside the version of the story that once protected us, but it can also be limiting. Part of growing with a story is allowing it to show us harder truths than it did when we first encountered it. In the next part of this video, we will step into those possibilities and ask what a braver, less forgiving adaptation of Snape might reveal about him and about us. And we are not doing that growing alone. Around this one complicated professor, an entire world of midnight arguments and whispered defenses has formed, stretching across years and across continents. We often think of Snape as a single, settled figure in the story, but in truth, he has always existed in debate, in disagreement, in the soft murmur of readers wondering who he really was. Long before HBO ever announced a new adaptation, fans were tracing his history through the darkness and the light. Was he a hero or a villain? A man who risked everything as a double agent, or a Death Eater who never truly repented? Was he a romantic figure, defined by a prophecy and a lifelong love for Lily? Or a cautionary tale about obsession, regret, and the damage we do when we cannot let go? Sometimes he is described as a victim of bullying in the Marauders era, sometimes as a bully himself in that dungeon classroom, but always as someone we cannot quite pin down. Tonight, we're diving into the way that uncertainty has bound people together. For many of you, Alan Rickman's voice became part of the architecture of sleep. You fell asleep to the films on quiet school nights, the slow cadence of his potions lessons turning into a kind of bedtime story, his presence a familiar weight in the background as you drifted off. Change, for those of us who built our nights around that sound, does not feel abstract. It feels personal. To understand why this new Snape will be so charged, we have to understand how different the wizarding fandom is now. Social media will catch every casting announcement, every first still, every altered line, and hold it up to the light. A slightly different inflection on turn to page 394, a harsher moment of classroom cruelty restored from the books, a softer expression in a memory of Lily. Each of these choices will be discussed, defended, rejected, or slowly accepted in real time. Imagine a world of watch parties, living rooms and dorm rooms lit only by screens and by the faint glow of street lamps outside. Episodes end, and the night does not. Threads appear, people comparing the first potions lesson to the novel, measuring this new Snape's sallow, unpleasant look against the more elegant shadow they remember, weighing his scenes with Neville or Hermione against the softened film versions. Sometimes the tone will be analytical, sometimes emotional, but always shared. In the comments beneath videos like this, in late-night rewatch threads, in quiet messages between friends who once clutched the same battered paperbacks, a community of night readers and watchers will form around him again. Your reactions, your doubts, your willingness to see him as more monstrous or more human will help define what this Snape ultimately means. And as we peel back the layers of that response, we will find something even more revealing than a single character. We will find what our own changing hearts are ready to face next. And that is where the braver, less forgiving version of his story truly begins. If HBO is willing to be brave, the Snape we meet on screen does not have to be the one we remember falling asleep to on late-night rewatches. He can be stranger, closer to the page, and at the same time more intimate than any version we have known. Imagine a world where, for one quiet hour, the story simply yields to him. Tonight, we're diving into an anthology-style episode set almost entirely in Snape's shadowed dungeon, where he brews a single, intricate potion over the course of the night. Each ingredient he measures becomes a key. A sprig of fluxweed carries us to the soot-stained sitting room of Spinner's End. A vial of lily sap pulls us into a summer by the river in Cokeworth. A drop of blood-red tincture plunges us into a Death Eater initiation beneath ancient stone. The history of this man is not told in exposition, but in the slow, ritual movements of his hands, as past and present swirl together in the cauldron. We often think of Snape as fixed, the hooked nose, the black robes, the same cold entrance through a billow of cloak. But what if the camera refused to see him as a single, stable figure? Across a whole season, every time he appears, the visual language could shift with Harry's understanding. Early on, the light might fall harshly across his face, sound dropping away so that his insults crack like spells. Later, the frame might widen, revealing the order of the phoenix at his shoulder, or a trembling hand hidden in shadow. Sometimes the music could sour when he enters, sometimes soften, but always in response to how much we and Harry think we know. To understand why this matters, we have to understand that perspective is its own kind of magic. Then there is structure. The films saved Snape's memories for the end, a single rush of revelation. HBO could do the opposite. Long before the final battle, we might drift into fragments of his childhood, see the young boy watching Lily's first burst of accidental magic, or glimpse a masked figure hesitating at Voldemort's side. If we see his secret meetings with Dumbledore in earlier seasons, we will know more than Harry does, and that knowledge becomes a quiet tension. We watch Harry misread every harsh word, every deduction of house points, and we feel the ache of prophecy twisting two lives at once. Even casting could become a spell. Instead of relying only on makeup, the series might choose different actors for Snape at different ages. A raw, sharp-edged teenager in the Marauders era, a hollow-eyed young man in the First War, the reserved professor we know in the Second. Time and guilt would not just be written in dialogue. They would be etched into changing faces, into the way each version carries his shoulders, speaks Lily's name, or hears the word mudblood in the echo of his own voice. None of this is prediction. These are possibilities, small doors in the dark corridor of adaptation, meant to open our imagination to how different this familiar story could feel in new hands. And as we move forward, we will see how even subtler choices, what is restored from the books, what is left in darkness, might shift the prophecy of who Severus Snape truly is. Now, back to the video. So now, we return to a room we know almost by heart, and we let it feel strange again. Tonight, we're diving into the Shrieking Shack, not as a fixed memory from the films, but as a place that might be rebuilt before our eyes. Imagine a world where that shack is not just a backdrop, but a character. The dust lies in thick, ancient sheets over crooked beams. Broken boards gape to the black water beneath, and every gust of wind sends a low moan through the warped walls, as if the house itself remembers centuries of secrets and screams. Far away, through those slatted windows, we hear the distant thunder of battle in the wizarding world, spells cracking the night, the faint echo of giants and centaurs and desperate cries. And on the floor, in the half-light, Severus Snape is bleeding, Nagini's venom already threading its cold way through his veins. We often think of this moment through the lens of the original films. The camera closing in, the chaos muffling into a hush, Harry kneeling to cradle a man he has hated for years. Tears gathering in dark eyes, the silver memory spilling out in a single, shimmering ribbon. The music rising to tell us that this is tragedy, that we are meant to mourn. It is intimate, carefully framed, a farewell shaped as much by Alan Rickman's quiet dignity as by the text itself. But as we peel back the layers of Snape's history, another possibility emerges. In an HBO telling that has shown us more of his cruelty in the classroom, more of Neville's shaking hands, more of Hermione's humiliation, more of the raw, unsoftened bitterness that the books describe. How does this room feel? Harry might still kneel, but perhaps his hands tremble with something more complicated than simple grief. To understand why this matters, we have to understand that by then we would have watched years of harsh words and small brutalities, woven alongside acts of astonishing courage. In that version, Snape's own awareness could be different too. The camera might linger not only on love remembered, but on failures faced. We might see in his eyes a man who knows he saved the wizarding world and still damaged children, who understands that Lily's son has every right to hate him even as he delivers the last necessary piece of the prophecy. Does he flinch at Harry's resemblance to James? Does he search, even then, for Lily's eyes and find no absolution there? HBO might choose to show more of the body's struggle, the ragged breath, the stiffness of poisoned limbs, or it might move inward, letting the world narrow to sound and shadow, to a strange, quiet relief that the burden is finally ending. Or it may keep the moment almost unbearably still, trusting you to bring your own judgment to this man who has been both tormentor and guardian. By the time we reach that shack again, the story may have reshaped us so thoroughly that the same actions carry new weight. The words, "Look at me," might not play as a simple plea for Lily's gaze, but as a final fragile request to be seen in full. And from there, the memories he gives Harry become not just an explanation of the past, but a challenge to everything we thought we knew, opening the door to how the series might reframe those final revelations next. And those memories lead us, very gently, to a single sentence that has echoed through the wizarding world ever since. Standing at a quiet grave, long after the war, Harry names Severus Snape, the bravest man I ever knew. And with those words, he closes a chapter of his own history as much as Snape's. We often think of that line as a verdict handed down by the story itself. But to understand why it matters, we have to understand who is speaking. This is not the frightened boy under the stairs anymore. This is a young adult who has just walked through Snape's life in a rush of images and pain, who has seen his mother's face in another man's memories, and who is trying to make sense of years of cruelty, protection, and secrecy in a single breath. It is raw. It is grateful. It is also, perhaps, incomplete. In the films, that sentence becomes a kind of spell of closure. The always reveal, the Patronus in the forest, the swirl of music over Snape's dying confession. All of it rises to an emotional high, and Harry's judgment seals it. They didn't just show us a man. They canonized a hero. The camera, the score, and Alan Rickman's weary, restrained performance all lean in the same direction, guiding us to accept that this is the final truth about Snape. Tonight, we're diving into a different possibility. What if, in an HBO retelling, that line is treated not as prophecy, but as perspective? Imagine a world where we hear Harry speak those words, yet the series has already spent hours letting you inhabit the classroom where Snape terrorizes Neville, belittles Hermione, and humiliates students who have never wronged him. The bravery of a double agent risking torture and death would still be there. But so would the pettiness, the bitterness, the small daily acts of harm. As we peel back the layers of this character, a more book-faithful cruelty could make "the bravest man I ever knew" feel less like a halo and more like a question. Can a man be brave in the face of Voldemort and still be a bully in the safety of a school corridor? Does courage in one arena cancel the damage done in another? Or do both truths stand, uneasy and unresolved, beside each other? Now, back to the video, and to us, together, holding that tension. HBO has the time to show Snape as a frightened child on Spinner's End, and as the adult who never truly unlearns his own patterns of hurt, to let centuries of wizarding darkness and prejudice flow through him without excusing him. Perhaps in that softer, slower telling, we are not asked to agree with Harry, or to reject him, but to sit with the discomfort of admiring someone's courage while acknowledging the scars they leave behind. And if the series dares to leave that verdict open, then the next revelation about Snape might not offer comfort at all, but something far more unsettling. And if the series dares to leave that verdict open, then the next revelation about Snape might not offer comfort at all, but something far more unsettling. Yet somehow, even that unease follows us into one of the gentlest places in our day, the moment when we close our eyes and let the world fall away. We often think of Snape as a presence we met in bright cinema seats or crowded bookstores. But for many of us, he first appeared in the hush of a bedroom, in the glow of a bedside lamp, or on a tiny screen during a late-night marathon when we promised ourselves just one more chapter, just one more scene, before sleep finally won. Those first potions lessons, that first snarled insult, the shock of Severus Snape on the staff list, blurred together with yawns and blankets and drifting thoughts. Imagine a world that is full of darkness and danger, yet somehow becomes the place we retreat to when the real world feels too sharp. Hogwarts is that world. Its corridors are haunted, its forests forbidden, its history tangled with war and prophecy, and still, the rhythm of the school year is steady as a heartbeat. Lessons begin in September. Feasts mark the seasons. Exams arrive and pass, and even when the wizarding world trembles, the castle's stones remain familiar under our feet. To understand why we keep returning there, even as adults, we have to understand how comforting that predictability is. The staircases may move, but the pattern does not. The same common rooms, the same portraits, the same ancient ghosts repeating the same complaints. In a world where our own lives twist in unexpected directions, this story offers a place where chaos is framed by timetables, house tables, and the promise that choices, even flawed ones, still matter. Snape's complexity is woven into that comfort. He is cruel and yet courageous, petty and yet capable of immense sacrifice. He hurts children and protects them. He fails Lily and spends the rest of his life, in his own broken way, trying to honor what was lost. Sometimes he is the nightmare teacher. Sometimes he is the unseen guardian in the shadows. But always he reminds us that adults can disappoint us and still, in some hidden corner, care. When we revisit his story through a new adaptation, or through slow, contemplative videos like this one, we are not only rereading the books, we are quietly rereading ourselves. We notice which moments still sting, which scenes we forgive more easily, which lines of his we now hear with different ears. Long before HBO reshapes him on screen, we are already reshaping our own judgments in the privacy of our thoughts. And as we peel back the layers of this history, something softens. The urgency fades. Right now, as you lie here, you're safe. The questions of who Snape truly was, what he deserves, what it all means, do not need to be solved before you sleep. Stories like this are companions for the night, steady lanterns in the dark, asking nothing from you except that you rest, and let the magic keep watch a little longer. Now back to the video. So, as you rest here, and the questions grow softer around the edges, we can gently gather the threads we have been following. Tonight, we're diving into the quiet idea that changing one man in this wizarding world does not just alter a few scenes. It can bend the entire shape of the story we carry with us into sleep. We often think of Snape in three overlapping images. There is the book Snape, harsh and petty, a cruel teacher whose insults and punishments leave real scars. There is the film Snape, smoothed by Alan Rickman's gravity into a tragic guardian, cruel but somehow distant, already half a legend. And there is the Snape who has grown in memory, not just a side character, but a central moral question, asking us whether love, regret, and sacrifice can ever fully redeem deliberate cruelty. As we peel back the layers of this history, we find that HBO's choices at every level could nudge him toward a different balance. Casting alone can tilt the axis. A rougher, more visibly damaged face might pull us toward the darker, book-faithful Snape, while a quieter, more vulnerable presence might invite us to see the frightened child inside the man. Perspective matters too. If the camera lingers in the corridors after Harry has gone, If we watch Snape alone in his office, or reporting to Dumbledore in whispered arguments, we are being guided toward a more human version. Structure can reshape him again. Imagine a world where the memories from the Pensieve are not saved for the very end, but are scattered through the seasons, long before we know the full prophecy or the final plan. Sometimes he would appear as a villain, sometimes as a victim, sometimes as a weary soldier, but always as a man caught between promises. Even the design of the dungeons, the way his robes move, the lighting on his face during a potions lesson can make him feel more nostalgic, echoing the films, or more unsettling, closer to the ancient, shadowed figure of the books. To understand why this matters, we have to understand that Snape is woven into the emotional spine of everything. A harsher Snape makes Dumbledore's trust feel more dangerous, and his manipulations colder. A more sympathetic Snape casts the Marauder's schoolboy pranks in a darker light and turns Lily from distant symbol into a living hinge between worlds. Even Harry changes. Is he forgiving the bravest man he ever knew, or recognizing a deeply flawed adult who still chose, again and again, to stand against the darkness? If an HBO series dares to present this more difficult Snape, it might also feel freer to show the cracks in everyone else. We may see Dumbledore's ambition, McGonagall's limits, Sirius's recklessness, and even Harry's anger with a new honesty, and in that honesty, a deeper tenderness. This is the quiet power of adaptation. Every retelling is a chance to ask, once more, what kind of story we want to be holding when we close our eyes at night, and which imperfect, complicated guardians we choose to keep watch over our dreams. Now, back to the video. So now, as that question settles, we can let the sharp edges soften a little. We do not have to stay in the bright light of analysis. We can step back into shadow. Imagine a world where the castle is ours again for just a few more minutes. The corridors are almost empty. The torches along the stone walls burn low, their flames swaying in slow motion, throwing gentle bands of gold and darkness across the floor. Somewhere far above, a clock counts the hour, but down here, the sound is muffled, as if the very history of Hogwarts is breathing quietly around you, asking you to walk slowly, to listen. We often think of Hogwarts as a place of noise and chaos and laughter, but at night, in these long passageways, it becomes something else entirely. A patient, ancient witness to centuries of footsteps, secrets, and prophecy. Portraits doze in their frames, heads bowed, candles guttering. A suit of armor shifts, not with a clatter, but with a soft, sleepy creak, then goes still again. Even the magic in the air feels drowsy, as if the whole wizarding world has pulled a blanket over its shoulders. In this quiet, we can imagine that Snape is here too. Perhaps, in this moment, he is pacing his office, robes trailing, a single lamp burning over a stack of essays, his mind circling old grudges and new dangers. Perhaps he is gliding along some other corridor, unseen, a dark silhouette at the far end of the hall. Or perhaps, for us, he is already only a memory, a figure walking through the Pensieve of our shared story, appearing and disappearing as we choose to remember him. He is gone, and yet he is still here. That is what stories do. As we peel back the layers of our thoughts about him tonight, we do not need to hold on to every detail. Let the arguments and examples blur a little, like chalk in the rain, until only a soft outline remains. Not every scene, not every theory. Just the gentle awareness that characters can change and grow with us, that an HBO retelling may bend the familiar shape of Snape without breaking the fragile thread that ties him to your own imagination. You do not have to decide anything before you sleep. You do not have to know yet whether you will love or resist a new face, a new voice, a new reading of his choices. It is enough that we have wandered these halls together, that we have opened a few old classroom doors and looked in, that we have admitted that our guardians can be imperfect and still important. So we slow our steps. The corridor stretches ahead, but we are in no hurry. Sometimes we walk, sometimes we pause to touch the cool stone, but always we move at your pace, neither hurried nor held back. When you are ready, we will turn the last corner and let the castle fade gently into the dark. So as the castle begins to fade, we do not slam the door on Severus Snape. We simply let the torchlight dim around him until he is only a shape in the distance, half shadow, half memory, waiting for you whenever you return. When morning comes, if you remember, you are welcome to bring that memory back to the waking world. You might wander down to the comments and, in your own time, share which Snape lives most vividly in your mind. The one drawn in ink and parchment in the books, the one carried in Alan Rickman's measured voice in the films, or the one you now imagine an HBO series might shape, with more hours, more silences, and more small human moments between the great events of the story. We often think of a character as a single, fixed figure. But to understand why Severus feels so powerful, we have to understand that each version exists side by side, layered in the same wizarding world, changing as you change, as the world around you changes, as new adaptations add their own shadows and light. Which of those versions lingers for you when the lights are off and the room is quiet? If you wish, you can also mark, gently, how many nights you have fallen asleep to this series. Some people like to note that it is their first night in Hogwarts' history. Some their seventh, some have lost count across weeks and months, until the chapters blur into one long, ancient corridor of sound. Sometimes as a simple number, sometimes as a tiny ritual, but always as a way of saying to yourself, "This is a place I can return to when the world feels too loud." Imagine a world where even disagreement is soft around the edges. If, in the daylight, you choose to share your thoughts, you might let them be calm and thoughtful, the way you would speak in a library beneath the watchful gaze of a portrait. There is room here for those who see Snape as a tragic guardian, for those who see only his cruelty, and for those who are still undecided, standing between those two truths and feeling the weight of both. Part of the magic of this story is that it can hold all of those feelings at once. Tonight, we're diving into only one life, but there will be more slow journeys, other characters, other corners of the wizarding history, other prophecies and secrets whispered in the dark, waiting whenever you need a story to fall asleep to. Long before you press play, the world is already there, patient, unhurried, ready to unfold at your pace. Now, back to the quiet. Somewhere far above, you might hear the faintest echo of Hogwarts bells, carried on cold night air, or a last, gentle musical phrase fading into stillness. We will leave you here, with no more doors to open, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to do. May your rest be deep, may your dreams be kind, and may the castle keep watch while you drift away.